love meeting all of you guys who supported Commodore and Amiga products over the years, because frankly, without you, I wouldn't have even had a career. So I love it that I can meet you people face to face and shake hands with you and so on. Secondly, of course, I'm here promoting my book and hoping to sell, well, one to every one of you really, would be really good. And thirdly, I'm here evangelizing about Friend OS, which is the organization I'm with now. Very, very exciting and actually very much like in the days of the Amiga. I believe Friend will change history, and I'll be talking about that in a while. But I think the way I'd like to start is that there has been a lot of conjecture about my role in Commodore. So I think what I'll do is I'll fill you in exactly from job to job what I did with Commodore. I was actually with Commodore for 12 and a half years, I think one of the longest serving employees. I actually joined Commodore in June of '83 in Commodore UK. And that was a very fluky opportunity to work for Commodore. I'd been living in Australia for a few years and decided to leave Australia to come back to the UK in order for me to hopefully get eventually an international role. And after I left Australia, I spent 7 weeks traveling the world to see what was likely to be the next big thing. And that's when I discovered that I thought home computing was going to be a huge industry. When I got back to the UK, in those days, of course, there was no internet, and you relied on the newspapers. And it used to be Thursday morning newspapers and Sunday papers is when all the good positions that were available were advertised. I was looking to get into the computer market in any way I could, although I knew absolutely nothing about computing. So I found this particular advertisement placed by an agency, a London agency, and if I remember rightly, it was a job selling some computer services, and it took me, I think, 30 minutes on the phone to convince this guy to at least give me an interview. Now, as I arrived at this place in London, I remember very distinctly there was a lady leaving and I held the door open for her. I can remember it like it was yesterday. And I went in and the guy said, "Come on, Mr. Pleasance, sit down." And he gave me an interview for the job that I'd gone for. And at the end of it, he said, "Well," he said, "in my opinion, this job that you've come for, you could do it standing on your head, but I'm not going to put you forward for it." "Oh, thanks a lot. That's really wonderful." "No," he said, "hear me out." He said, "The thing is," he said, "I've just looked at your CV," and he said, "You've got the best retail background that I've ever seen." And he said, as a recruitment agent, it would be remiss of me to not put you into a position that utilizes your skills. So I more or less got up to leave, and he said, "Sit down." He said, "Did you notice that there was a lady leaving as you arrived?" I said, "Yes." He said, "Well, she has just given me a brief to find somebody for a particular role." He said, "And as you saw, she left as you arrived. I've not even had the chance to write out this brief, ready to advertise it." And he said, "I think you're absolutely perfect for this job." And she was from Commodore. I didn't apply for a job with Commodore, but I just was there at the right place at the right time. Now, so I'll just very briefly tell you about my career at Commodore. I joined UK in June of '83. By December of '89, I was appointed a sales and marketing director at the UK. And then very soon after that, I applied for and got general manager's job at Commodore Electronics Limited, which was based in Basel in Switzerland. And that was the holding company for the whole of the group. And the reason it was because in the particular canton in Basel, which was Aisch, zero tax was paid. And I was there for 2 years, and I had 35 countries to look after, countries where Commodore did not have an office. And for me, that was a marvelous opportunity because I'm very much a hunter. I love to hunt, to get out there and find new businesses. I ended up adding another country. I actually signed up India as well as a country. And then after 2 years at CEL, I was sent to America as Vice President Consumer Products with Commodore Inc., which was the sales company for the US, who had done a terrible job. I mean, I actually ended up calling them sales prevention officers because they were so bad at what they did. And I was at Commodore US for a year, and I managed to get us trading again with all the major retailers. And then I was forced back to the UK to take over as managing director of the UK. I'd actually turned that job down once before because, as I said, I'm a hunter, not a farmer, and I was very happy having 35 countries to go at. But in this instance, I was forced back to the UK. And the reason I was forced back was because Commodore International was in very serious financial trouble, and they needed cash, they needed cash flow urgently. So I was told, right, you're MD now, you take over. And I said to Mehdi Ali, who was the president at the time, that I said, look, if you need me to, as I believe you do, you need me to generate cash. I'm not a financial qualified person. I can read a balance sheet and stuff like that. But really speaking, if you want me to sell and to turn the business on as much as I can, I would rather somebody else handle the finances. So we agreed that Colin Proudfoot, who was the financial controller at the time, and I didn't know Colin at all, to be honest with you. But anyway, he and I shared the MD-ship jointly. And so that's answered anybody's questions about why was I joint MD. It's because I wanted to be joint MD, which allowed me to do what I do best. Right, so has anybody any particular questions about anything in particular, or shall I just ramble on because I can do whatever you want? Any questions at all that I can start with?
Maybe a silly question, but did you do also the distribution over here in Netherlands and Belgium?
No.
The German part?
No, both Belgium and the Netherlands and Germany, they all had their own offices, their own operating subsidiaries. The Netherlands was run by a guy called Bernard van Tienen, who's passed away now. He was probably the biggest crook known to man. And in fact, in my book, I managed to get permission from a Dutch newspaper who did an article about Bernard van Tienen, about what a crook he was.
That's all right. I'm Dutch. So.
Yeah, no, but I'm just telling you because I mean, this is the guy. I'll tell you what, let me just go back 2 seconds. In my opinion, there are two major reasons why Commodore was always destined to fail. One is they never, ever, ever had any kind of business plan. Fact. And I'll give you an example of that in a moment. The other reason why they were destined to fail is that they never, ever had independent auditors checking all the books, which is ridiculous. If you've got, independent companies all around the world operating and reporting in things, and if you don't have them audited, you don't know what the truth is. And Bernard van Tienen was a perfect example of what was happening. He used to boast to all of us MDs or general managers, whatever the title was. And that title, by the way, the only difference is the type of company that's set up. General manager or managing director, it's the same level, but some companies, they have managing directors, some companies, they have general managers. But he used to boast to all of us that every quarter end, if he had not reached his target, he wanted to make certain he reached his target, so therefore he could claim bonuses and commission. So he used to invent invoices. He used to put product on a truck and send it on a journey for 5 days at the end of the quarter and bring it in at the beginning of the next quarter. quarter after quarter after quarter. So all of the figures that he reported back into the head office, they were never true. And the extent was millions actually at the end. And it's interesting that he was one of only 2 people in the world that was prosecuted by the Dutch liquidator for things that he'd done wrong. It was him, and the other person was a guy called Petr Tchenko. They were both prosecuted big time. Annoyingly, from my point of view, both of those cases were protected by 3 days before Commodore International declared bankruptcy. The officers and directors of Commodore International took out an insurance policy to protect officers and directors of Commodore from any misdoings. They spent $5 million on a policy that gave them complete protection, and that was non-cancelable, non-revocable. You take the $5 million, you protect everybody. And that policy, which of course was paid out of what should have been creditors' money, people, all the employees who didn't get paid, they spent that money to protect their own backsides. And Petro and Bernard Bentin were both protected by that policy, which really annoyed the hell out of me, you can imagine. Anyway, so those are the 2 reasons why I believe Commodore was destined to fail right from the very, very start. And I can absolutely endorse that, because I was recruited specifically to sell Commodore PETs. Remember, this is 1983, this is before we had PCs. I was recruited to sell PETs into a brand new market, the retail market. And I'd been there about 2.5 months, and I'd got everything ready to start selling. And then they tell me, oh, by the way, we've just been told that there's not going to be anywhere near enough product to open a new channel. So I'd been recruited really for no reason. No business plan. Luckily for me, the 64 was going crazy, and they gave me the job of national accounts manager to look after all the big retailers for the 64 and the VIC and other consumer products. So as you can see, I've had a very extensive background with Commodore, and in fact, after Commodore International went bankrupt, as you know, all of the subsidiaries, one after another, very quickly went bankrupt. And Commodore UK, because we were the strongest business, we lasted 14 months, in fact, 14 months before we had to ourselves declare bankruptcy. And the reason was that we were a strong business, and as the other subsidiaries went, we were buying all their product and carried on selling. And then during that period of time, Colin and I decided that we would try to buy the worldwide assets. And we devised a business plan which was so good that in 1994-5, we raised $50 million in investment money for us to take over the company. You try raising $50 million today, it's really difficult. So that's the background. So I think you can see now I can cover a great deal of the Commodore world, which is why I've written the book, and it's all about all the little things that happened, the opportunities that were passed by, refused, decisions that were made and were changed, and all sorts of things. Which it's a very good read if you're interested in what actually happened within Commodore. I've also added into that chapters from several other people within Commodore, because when I read what I'd written, it just sounded to me more like a story about David Pleasance than it was about Commodore, which in some ways I guess was inevitable because it was from my ears and my eyes. But I wanted a much broader perspective, but still from the inside. So there are chapters in the book by R.J. Michael, by Dave Haney, by Dr. Peter Kittel, who was in Germany. Beth Richards, she was the lead engineer on the CD 1200 project. And she's written a chapter which tells you all about many things that were designed that were never got released because of the mismanagement of Commodore. So anybody who's really interested in the soul of what happened, it's all in the book. And I can tell you that I've had nobody complain to me about it. Everybody loves the read of the book. So hopefully anybody who hasn't got it, please buy it, because you will not be disappointed. So, questions? Yes, sir.
I'm wondering, the brand of Amiga, it was good, or was the bankruptcy of Commodore because Amiga?
Absolutely not.
No,
Amiga was the best thing that happened to Commodore by a long way. But again, you see, the fact that they had no business plan, they spent all that money developing the first machine, the Amiga 1000, which was not a home computer and it wasn't a top-end computer. It fell right in the middle, but it was too expensive. And again, one of Commodore's big downfalls is that they never ever used to ask the frontline people like me, what does your market want? What can we make for you that your market wants? Give us an idea. What price should it be? What features do you need? They never ever asked the question. They would suddenly send you. I mean, I remember getting 10,000 +4s sent into my warehouse. What the hell am I going to do with a +4? Use it as a doorstop. Because that's all it was good for.
Yeah, it's like the Amiga 600. It's also a crazy product. Eh?
Yeah, but again...
At that time it was old.
Yeah, but you see, again, you obviously haven't bought my book. No, hear me out. No, the thing is this, right, is that, and I'll tell you exactly how the 600 came about. And again, no business plan, right? In the UK, we managed to keep the Commodore 64 alive for 2 years beyond its true sell-by date by doing good bundles and packages and keeping it alive. But there came a time when I knew this was our last Christmas, it's over. We're not going to be able to sell anymore. But I knew that we had an audience, a socio-economic group of people who could afford to spend £200 on a 64, but could not spend £400 or £500 on an Amiga. So I went to Mehdi Ali and I said, right, Mehdi, what I want you to do now, let us make a very, very cut-down, low-cost Amiga. Maybe we can stretch another £50 and maybe we can sell it for £249. But as long as the Amiga can be expanded up to what it should be, as and when you can afford it, so that I keep that market, that those people can only afford to spend £200 or maybe £250. So the idea was we will launch an Amiga 300, a obviously lesser model number, makes it very easy for people to understand that it is a lower model than the 500, and make it as cheap as we can so that we capture that same audience. We don't lose that. You can imagine the number of people. More people could afford the 64 than could afford the Amiga. So in principle, you must agree, it made perfectly good, logical sense to do this. Everything was agreed. The next thing I know is that they produced something called the A600, which actually cost more money to make than the 500 did. So they've defeated themselves right from the very start. And by calling it the 600, it killed all the 500 sales. Nobody wanted to buy 500 because the 600 is a new and better model. Can you see the dilemma? And because it cost more, it meant we all the money we were making on the 500, we lost that because people stopped buying it. And then we were making less money on the 600 because it cost more to make. I rest my case about mismanagement. Any other questions? Yes.
It's maybe an extraordinary question, but why actually did you hire somebody working for IBM? How could you know he was loyal for Commodore afterwards?
So why did we hire somebody?
From IBM. There was an IBM manager hired.
Yes, there was. That was a guy called Bill Sidness. He was hired as our head of engineering. And let me tell you this, when I went to America in January of 92, and the first thing I did when I walked into Westchester was to go and see the engineers, because I know without the engineers we didn't have a business. And I went to see them, and there were seven Amiga engineers. But to my horror, there was 40 PC engineers. In 1992, when nobody in their right minds would make your own PCs, when they were coming out of the Far East, in truckloads at really, really cheap money, we got 40 PC engineers on the payroll. And the reason was that Bill Sidners, whose fame was he was responsible for the PC Junior, which is understood to be the worst flop in world history, that was his claim to fame. And what he did was he gave jobs to 40 of his mates. And we hired him. I mean, come on, it's laughable, isn't it? If it wasn't so serious, it's absolutely laughable. But that is one of Mehdi Ali's biggest failings, is that he was a terrible recruiter. He used good companies. He used, what they called, I'll think of the name in a moment, a very good recruitment company that he used all the time. Heydrich and Struggles, that's who they were. They were world famous recruitment agency. But he was a terrible picker of people. He also, at the same time as he hired Bill Sidners, he hired a head of manufacturing. And I can't even remember that guy's name. He was that insignificant. But what he did, he said to Mehdi, forget all the plants we've already got, Hong Kong, Singapore, and what. He said, Philippines. We must have a plant in the Philippines. And I said to myself, this doesn't make any sense, because we have no business. We are not selling anything into the Far East. So why would we build a place to make product that's 5 weeks by sea from your main market? I'm sorry, it makes no commercial sense whatsoever. But then we found out the reason why this guy had said we must have a place in the Philippines. He had apparently, the company he was before, who we recruited him from, had a place in the Philippines. And this guy's mistress was there. He wanted us to build a factory, which we did, because he wanted to be close to his mistress. That's a true story, I swear to my life. I mean, when you think about it, it's just horrendous. Absolutely horrendous. I say this to you in all sincerity. I think if we had hired a team of professional saboteurs, they could not have done a better job of killing a Commodore than the management did. Terrible. Is you going to ask a question?
That was my question about IBM.
Oh no, there was another guy who put their hand up. Somebody, no? You were just scratching your ear. Okay, no worries. Okay, let me tell you a little bit about Irving Gould. Irving Gould was the chairman of Commodore, and he was the major shareholder. He owned 22% of the shares. Interesting man, Canadian, and he was a tax exile in 3 countries. He was a tax exile in Canada and in the USA and in the Bahamas. And he was not allowed to stay more than, I think it was either 2 or 3 days in any one place. Otherwise, they would hit him for tax. So he spent his whole life traveling. And of course, he used the Commodore jet for that, which was a cause of a big argument with Jack Tramiel. And the story goes that it was over that Jack ended up leaving, but that's not true. The truth of the matter is that Jack wanted to bring his 3 sons onto the board of Commodore. And because Jack only had 6% of the shares, he didn't have enough say. And of course, Irving refused and said, because to be honest with you, that was a good decision to refuse. Because when you have a board, that board needs to be made up of people who all bring different skills to make it like a jigsaw puzzle and make a whole picture. So just bringing people on board because they're your family, that doesn't make any sense. And that's the reason why Jack, I think, said, well, I don't see any reason why I should stay. And Irving said, nor do I. So Jack left. But let me tell you about Irving. I knew Irving very well. Every time I went to our office in New York, in Manhattan, I'd always go and say hello to him, or I'd meet him at Seabit in Hanover or wherever. And we got on really, really well. And one day I said to him, look, Irving, I know this is an impertinent question, and if you don't want to answer, I totally understand. I said, but obviously you're a very wealthy man. Would you mind telling me how you made your money? I'm always looking to learn how people make money. Why not? And he said, I don't mind. And excuse my language, ladies, but he said, I took the best piss of my life. What on earth are you talking about? He said, it's like this, David. He said, I was in the Four Seasons restaurant in Manhattan, which at that time was the trendy place for businessmen and rich people to be. He said, it was lunchtime there, and he said, I needed to go to the toilet. He said, so I got up, went into the gents, and I just stood up there, and a guy comes in who was effing and blinding. I can't effing believe this. These are suit effing people. And he was really getting agitated. And I only said to the guy, whoa, what's the matter with you? Oh, he said, it's this bloody stupid company of mine. And I said, what's the matter? He said, I've just brought to my company, to their table, a fantastic opportunity, and they've just turned it down. And I just can't believe how effing stupid they are. So I said, well, what is this opportunity? And the guy said, well, he said, you know how at this moment in time goods get shipped around the world by sea. And he said, if you can imagine, you're loading up barrels of oil, you're loading wheat and grain and coal and electronics, everything. And he said, and it's a nightmare the way that they have to pack them into the ship's hold. He said, well, these guys have come up with a containerized system, 20-foot, 40-foot containers with vehicles to carry them, with ships to carry them. That makes it so much easier. He said, and I've just brought to my company the rights for the container ship for the USA, and they've turned it down. And Irving said, you've just found your man. And that's how he made his money. And he said he took the best piss of his life. Interesting story. Anybody else? Look, before I do anything else, you know they say in life that you get nothing for free. Well, I'm just going to usurp that, because you can get this for free. If you go onto my website, which is downtimepublishing.com, and you can download this for free. What this is an album that I produced in my studio in 1995, and it's called Everybody's Girlfriend, which of course what Amiga stands for, female friend, as you probably know. And what this is, it's a celebration in music of 10 years of the Amiga. And in our studio, we used the Amiga 4000 in the heart of the studio. But this is not computer music. This is real music, live musicians, live vocals, and everything recorded live. I'm not a big fan, I'm sorry people, but I'm not a big fan of computer music. I never really have been. But I think if you're a musician as I am and you play real live music, that's probably why I'm not so keen on it. Anyway, this has 14 tracks. The only thing that we knew about our target audience was that they owned an Amiga or they wanted to own an Amiga. We didn't know age or genre or anything. So what we did is we put 14 tracks of different genres of music on here, and in the hope that something would appeal to somebody. Anyway, I was forced to re-release this when I released the book, which was a year ago, end of September. I've now sold out of this again. So now I'm giving it away free to everybody. You just go downtimepublishing.com and you get it for free. And I think you'll enjoy it. I'm very proud of it still after all these years. So you do get something for nothing. Any more questions, or would you like me to just keep telling you more stories? I don't mind, whatever you want. Yes, sir.
Now, where did the culture come from? Because other computer businesses in those days, they at least had a plan. They at least knew what they wanted. They had financial plans. They know where they're going to. Why wasn't it at Amiga? Why wasn't it the Commodore?
I don't know the answer to that. All I know is that they had no business plan. And you can tell, I mean, good example, right? At the time we launched the 600, which was ridiculous anyway, they ran out of 500s. So we'd got some 500s on order. So what did they do is they put 500 pluses inside a 500 box without saying on the box that it was a 500 plus, without telling anybody that some games would not run on it. That's another example of one crisis to the next. We weren't told they were doing that. They just shipped them.
For example, the lack of independent oversight, was that a deliberate choice, or was it just?
I have no idea. I mean, I can't answer that question, because you would think that the board, who are in charge of controlling the company's fortunes, would insist on it. It's normal practice. You cannot rely on one man, essentially, or one woman, as it could be, for reporting that everything was hunky-dory, was right. You have to check it. And I know for a fact that one of the guys from Wim Mulders, he was in Commodore Belgium. I don't know if you know Wim. Anyway, he had to come to London to meet Mehdi Ali at the meeting, and representing what was in Holland and Belgium, because Bernard Van Tienen was no longer there. And the first thing that Mehdi said is, "Where's my effing millions?" And we said, "I don't know what you're talking about." He said, I did done some figures. But just to put perspective on Bernard Van Tienen, right? Colin Proudfoot and I, we had to go to see the Dutch liquidator in Amsterdam. There was one, I can't remember what it was, but there was some IP that we jointly shared. So we had to go and talk to him about how he wanted to deal with this IP. So while we were there, we got on very well with the guy. And he said, "Oh, by the way, gentlemen, what do you think of this?" And he pushed a piece of paper across to us, and we looked at it. And it was expenses had been put in by Bernard Van Tienen, and it was for an establishment called Yabium, which, as I understand it, was the most high-profile brothel in Amsterdam. And get this was for the amount of $280,000. What do you think about that? Well, somebody certainly did, without a doubt. Yes, sir.
I wanted to know something about Commodore 64.
Yes.
C64GS.
Yes.
Was it also something you were involved with?
I was vehemently against it.
Well, I was curious about that because I don't know what the idea behind it was.
Nor do I. You see, as I said earlier on, if people came to us at the front line, we're the people that are selling into the retail market. We're selling to people who buy and sell our product. If you don't come to us and ask what you want, and you just produce something that you think is a good idea, it's a nonsense. Now, it's particularly a nonsense in Commodore's case because, years before, Commodore was in the software business as well. And they made cartridges, and it was a massive loss because the cartridges cost an awful lot to make. And if you don't sell them, you can't recycle them. They're a complete waste of money. And I remember when Commodore closed, we had a big plant. The front of my book has got a picture of a Commodore building. That was a Commodore Corby. We actually had bought a 10-acre site, and we built a purpose-built facility on that site where we had warehousing, we had distribution, we had sales and marketing. Everything was on that one site. A fabulous building. And they decided to close that. God knows why, because we had assembly there as well, of course. Anyway, I had to end up selling all of the inventory. We had hundreds of thousands of software titles and things that were sat in there that Commodore had lost money on. And as an aside, I'll tell you a little story about that. One of the games that we had was a product called Spirit of the Stones. And what it was a game that it was based on the Isle of Wight, just off the UK, the bottom end of the UK. And this guy had written a book about hiding some gemstones at different places on the Isle of Wight. And this game was you had to find out where there were some gemstones, and people actually did find them, all right? Anyway, that was done by Commodore in conjunction with the Isle of Wight Tourist Board. And when the deal was done, the Isle of Wight Tourist Board were getting £5 from every sale. Now, I found, I think we'd got something like 25,000 of them or something, and they were completely worthless. But I got somebody to come along and offer me £2 each for them. So I got in touch with the Isle of Wight Tourist Board and said, listen, we're now clearing everything out. And if you agree to it, we're going to sell it for £2, you get £1 and we get £1. No, he said, we're not going to do that. £5 or nothing. And I said, well, if you're forcing me to dump the product. No, you won't do that. We did. We had 2 lawyers, we had a digger, we built a bloody great big hole, and we buried the lot and signed and everything, and they're gone forever. That's just a bit of an aside, but it's exactly the kind of thing you have to put up with. Anyway, so I what I'm saying is I ended up selling every bit of software that was in the warehouse and beyond. And it was a good lesson for us because we absolutely lost a fortune on being in the software business. So why on earth would we want to produce a 64 games system which was cartridge based, right? And we had no way of getting software. None of the software publishers wanted to produce cartridges anymore because they were too expensive and too much of a risk for anything you didn't sell. I mean, at least with cassettes you could recycle them. And of course, CDs were as cheap as chips anyway. Can you see what I'm saying? So I was completely against the GS, which never really eventuated anyway. I think there was a few prototypes around or something. Any other questions? Yes?
What do you think has happened with the CD32s that you missed on the Christmas sale? Would they be stored in a
They've been sold. They've been released and sold, and probably through the black market. They've all gone now in a long time, years and years ago. Yeah, they were probably sold. They were more than likely sold into Turkey and Poland, places like that. Yes, sir.
Do you believe in that there are still warehouses with new Amigas in boxes?
No way. Yeah, I mean, there's lots of stories, but there's also lots of scams. I don't believe that there's warehouses anywhere. It's been 30 odd years since they were being manufactured. Every now and again, somebody will find one in their up in their loft or something that they probably never even used. I mean, even my nephew, he rang me up. I was in Poland. I was at the Pixel Heaven event in Warsaw, and my nephew rang me up. And he said, "Uncle David," he said, "I've just found a CD32 up in the loft, which is my sister had bought him for Christmas, whenever it was, years and years ago." He said, and I went on the internet. "Uncle David, you're famous." I said, "What are you talking about?" He said, "I've been told that if you sign this, that I'll get more money for it." So I'm just saying that things do turn up, and there's lots of stuff. But people are getting wise now, and they're charging very big money for some of these things. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
What musical instrument do you play?
I play flamenco guitar. And in my younger days, when I could play, I learned to play in Australia, of all places, and although I'm not from there, I'm from the UK. And in those days, I did a lot of television in Australia, and then I had my own little dance company, and we did television. And back in the UK, I had another dance company. I never did television in the UK, but yeah, I did a lot, played a lot. Before I joined Commodore, because when I married my first wife, I was a professional musician. I was teaching in a very expensive public school, guitar, about 2 days a week. I think I had 30 private students who used to come to me for lessons. I played in a local restaurant 2 nights a week, Friday and Saturday night. And then I'd also have my cabaret with my dancers and everything, and we'd do cabaret all over the place. And my life was bliss. Wasn't making very much money, but it wasn't about the money. Anyway, I got married, and then not long after that, my first wife said, "Get a real job or else." And instead of me saying, "Go forth and multiply," I I did. And again, it's another complete and utter fluke, that is, because I sat stunned for 2 or 3 days thinking, what on earth can I do for a living? Because when I was young, I went to Australia when I was 17. I was sick of my family, sick of England. Went to Australia, and I just did whatever I needed to do to survive. You know, I dig trenches, I was a scaffolder, I was a bus conductor for 6 months in Sydney, which was an absolute breed, a hoot, I loved it. All sorts of things, but I had no sort of career. And anyway, my dad, who was an electronics engineer, while I was in Australia, he had moved and bought a shop in a little town called Shrewsbury. And my father was he was a cripple. When he was when I was about 2 or 3 years of age, he was a passenger on the back of a motorbike, and they got sideswiped by a car, and his knee was crushed. And in those days, they didn't have artificial kneecaps, so he was permanently disfigured, couldn't bend his leg. And my dad used to sell. This is when the time when all the those horrible colour televisions came out. Do you remember the big ones, heavy things, and they were notoriously unreliable. And I used to go into the shop a couple of days of the week to help him carry stuff. Anyway, about 3 or 4 days after I'd just been told to get a real job, the guy walks into the store, into my dad's shop, and he said, "David, will you come and have a coffee?" I said, "Sure." And it turns out his name was Phil Evans, and he was the manager of a local credit Provident group. They were. My father used to offer credit terms for anybody who wanted to buy, anything, and through Provident, but they were called Practical Credit Services. And this guy, having a coffee, he said, "Look," he said, "I've been in your shop a few times when you've been there." He said, "You've just got a certain way with people that I really, really like." He said, "Our business is growing." He said, "I need to get myself an assistant manager. Would you like the job?" 3 days after I've been told to get a job. My life has been full of those sort of things like that. It's amazing, really, how life can deal cards, and how you play the cards back, I suppose, is what matters, Any other questions? Come on, there must be. There must be. Yes, sir.
How come you're not walking next to your shoes? You're just a plain normal guy.
Well, I've always been a plain normal guy.
Who were holding the fix for Commodore UK.
Yeah, as I said, I was with Commodore all over the world, and I've got a complete perspective of it because I was all over the world. And I think a couple of people have said I would never buy a book from him because he was only in the UK. Well, hello, the UK was the biggest contributor to Commodore's fortunes. And as I said, I've been all over the world working for Commodore and been in positions where I've witnessed things that a lot of people have not witnessed. And I guess, to be honest with you, I never dreamt ever of writing a book. But when I got back into the industry by being invited to be a speaker at Amiga 30 in Amsterdam, and then again for Germany, it was when I came back onto the scene, and then suddenly I'm telling people about the stories, and eventually people saying to me, "Why don't you write about it? Why don't you write about it? Because it's interesting." And I had no idea. I'd never written anything before in my life, maybe a couple of songs and things, but eventually I kind of thought, well, actually, maybe it's not a bad idea. I'm not getting any younger, and I'd really like to leave some kind of a legacy behind. And so, as I said, I started to write the book, and then I discovered that I really needed other people's input into it. And I think the book is 368 pages, 90,000 words, as Dan Wood will tell you, because he actually did the audio book for me. And Dan is a professional radio DJ. He works for a Gem Radio in Nottingham. And the audio book is over 8 hours long. If anybody wants an audio book. But for me, it's really, really good because I started to realize all the things that I'd witnessed. I'll tell you another story. You'll like this story, right? This is an opportunity that was turned down. I was very close because I worked very closely with them, with the software publishers, the main games publishers. And one day, the guys from Signosis, Ian Hetherington, and Jonathan Ellis, I said, can you get Mary Alley up here, up to our visitors? I said, well, probably I can drag him up there kicking and screaming, which is what I did. And Ian Hetherington was the technical guy at Signosis. And I'd already given them development kits for the CD32, as I had most of the major software publishers, and they'd written NDAs, and none of them let it out, that they'd got this. Anyway, so I take Mehdi Ali up there, and Mehdi is a bigger techno dumbass than I am, and that's saying something. Anyway, Ian starts to say to him, listen, Mehdi, I've looked at the system, and I think if we do that little tweak, and we do that, and we do this, and we do this, you'll end up with a product that is infinitely better than you've got now. And under normal circumstances, any reasonable person who didn't understand what that person was telling would say, look, you're talking over my head. How about I get Dave Haney or I get whoever it is, and they have a conversation with you, and then you discuss it with them, which is what the normal person would do. Instead, he got angry because he felt he was being talked down to, and he lost his rag, and I had to kind of drag him out of there. Now, the significance of that is as follows. Not long after that time, Signosis sold out to Sony, lock, stock and barrel. Not long after that, Ian Hetherington was made head of Sony PlayStation Europe. And his technology was what went into the bloody PlayStation, and we were offered it for free. How about those, mate? Can you believe anything more ridiculous? We were offered it for free. We turned it down. Incredible, absolutely incredible. Yes, sir.
Do you think with the IP that Commodore had at the early 90s and with proper management that they would survive the cheap PC crush that all the other computers felt at the time? Did they survive? For example, the current Apple?
Yeah, okay, it's a very good question. My answer is an opinion, because nobody can actually say what would have happened. What I can tell you is this, is that the business plan that Colin and I produced was that we would have nothing to do with manufacturing or selling PCs or anything other than initially the Amiga line. What we planned to do was to license the trademarks. For example, CBM at one time was as powerful as IBM. So what we were going to do is we were going to go to any manufacturer who wanted to and say to them, if you want to license CBM's name to put on your PCs, it'll cost you 2.5% of your trade price. And then all we would need to do was to make sure we had a quality control division of our own that made certain that whatever went out with the CBM name on it was up to scratch. Okay. As far as Commodore name was concerned, anything with a plug on it could be sold with the Commodore badge on it. Why? Because Commodore was an accepted brand in all of the retail markets throughout the whole of Europe. So somebody could produce a toaster, a kettle, an iron, hair dryer, whatever. But again, the same thing. We say to them, 2.5% of your trade price comes to us as a royalty, and then all we have to do is to make sure the quality is up to scratch. Now, that's not expensive to do, but it's bringing in revenue, high volume revenue, because all of these things, there's a market for. I mean, how many Chinese companies whose name is Honky, Conky, Shonky, or whatever it is, they'd love to get distribution, but they don't have the name. Commodore was a well-known brand name that people accepted. But then to turn around and say, okay, You now have the license for CBM PCs. You now have the license for Commodore products, which you're now paying us for. We've got our own sales team. How about we represent you for your products, and we sell your products into the market that we're already in for commission. So we don't have to pay, we don't have to manufacture anything, we don't have to hold inventory, we have to do nothing. We simply take orders, place the orders, and when the orders get delivered, we get paid for it. That was the fundamental basis of our business plan that helped us raise $50 million. Because when you look at it, it's a no-brainer, right? I know, for example, I don't know if you remember the trademark Bush. Used to be radios and televisions. Bush was all over Europe. I know the guy who bought that, and he's made a fortune by re-releasing products under that name. Anyway, get back to what we were going to do with Amiga, all right? We had already designed in Germany actually, a tower case. And the idea was that through our independent dealers, who I've always believed are the heart and soul of our business, we were going to offer the opportunity for people to take their 500s and upgrade to a 1200 using as many of the peripherals as you can. 1200 you could upgrade to 1000 or 2000 or 3000. And the idea was that everything we produced would be able to fit, the PCBs would fit into this small mini tower it was. And we were even going to sell PCBs on their own for people to do this. Now this whole system, we called it Amiga Infinity for obvious reasons. But the thing is that we knew eventually we would have, even though we'd got other things being manufactured, the AAA and stuff like that, we knew eventually that the Amiga line would have to end because it can't go on forever. And we were working on a product which was codenamed Ombre, and this was a RISC-based core, HP RISC-based core, which had built into it a 3D rendering engine, the Blitter chip. It had 5.1 surround sound stereo, which in 1994 was state-of-the-art. And I was shown it, cobbled together in software as to how it would be. And I can tell you now, ladies and gentlemen, there's nothing on the market today that comes anywhere near what that product could do. And the guy, Dr. Ed Hepler, who was designing it, I actually met up with him about 2 or 3 years ago, and he was almost a broken man because he'd done all this work, and ESCOM never even took it. They just let it go. Can't believe it. But that was part of our business plan anyway. So in answer to the question, I think by not being involved in all the ancillaries of the PC market, who wants to be in the PC market? But if you do it on a licensing way, as I've explained, it's a great way to generate revenue without having any investment in it except for your quality control, which can be very minimal in terms of cost. Can you see what I was talking about? It's a fantastic opportunity. So that was what we were planning to do. Yes, sir.
Can you tell something about the Amiga being seen as only a games machine? Because its operating system was very good at its time, but perception. Yeah.
Yeah, yes. Well, again, you see, there's the example when Commodore bought the company that the Amiga was developed through, Historia, I think they were originally called. The guys there, RJ Michael and all those people, they said what we're designing is the ultimate in games machine. But Commodore's misguidedness made them make it more of a business machine, but it wasn't sufficiently up there to be a business machine. So it fell in between the two places. So that's why the ST managed to get in really quickly, because once you know the story about how Jack Jamil thought he'd bought Amiga. Did you know that story? Some of you don't. Basically what happened was this, is that when Jack Jamil left Commodore, he already knew about the Amiga product because Commodore talked about it. So the first thing he does is to go over to them, and they were in desperately need of money, really desperately need. So he did a deal with them. He lent them $500,000, wrote the check and said, here, if you can't repay back within 60 days or whatever it was, then I'll own the business. Once he'd done that, happy in the knowledge that he'd secured the Amiga, he went and bought Atari for $1 because Atari had massive debts. And when they sold it, they just wanted rid because I think it was costing them $10,000 a day. Atari was losing them. So he bought Atari, and by the time he'd done all that deal, because obviously these things take, several weeks, he then went back to Amiga. In the meantime, Commodore had gone in and said, we can do a much better deal than that. And Jack to me said, I'll sue your ass, I'll sue Commodore's ass and everything else, breach of contract. And they said, there is no contract. He said, yes, there is. He said, I gave you $500,000. And they gave him his check back. They'd never cashed his check. So that it was, nothing was valid because they'd not cashed the check. And in fact, as I understand it, Leonard Tremere has got that check up on his wall in his study at his house. So, but anyway, very quickly, they got together some of the engineers and they built the ST. And they got that onto the market. So that took where the original Amiga should have been at that lower level. It was still a bit expensive. And the one smart thing they did was they added a MIDI port to it, which meant it was a perfect computer for anybody looking in the music business. And I went to Medi sometime later with the 500 and said, can't we have a MIDI port? And he said, it costs 57 cents to put one on. And only maybe 2 in 10 will ever use it, so it's a waste of money. This is the kind of mentality that you're dealing with with what I was dealing with. You can't understand, reasoning behind so many other things. Incredible, terrible. Do you know when you produce something and you're successful with it, and let's talk about the Batman pack, right? Because there's no question in my mind that the Batman pack was what made my career. And what happened was that I had a new MD came in, a guy called Steve Franklin, young guy. He was from the business systems area. He knew about PCs and stuff like that. And when he took over, the first thing he did was he sacked everybody in our business systems division, except for 2 people. One was Kieran Sumner, who was in charge of the Amiga 1000, because none of his people knew anything about the Amiga. So that was a good decision. And the other was a guy called Peter Talbot, who was in charge of our education division. And Peter was a public school boy, very well in with everybody, and was doing a really good job. Everybody else got fired. And Steve Franklin brought all his own people in. He did not speak one word to me for 2 weeks, not a word. And then he comes in and he says, right, Pleasance, my office now. Okay. He said, look, there's no easy way to say this. He said, but if I knew anybody who understood your side of the business, you wouldn't be here now. Thanks a lot. I'd been there, about 5 or 6 years. And he said, no, I don't know anything about you. He said, but I've been told to come in and change the whole ethos of Commodore. So he said, it seems to me like I'm stuck with you. So while I'm stuck with you, here are my rules. And he spent 20 minutes talking about integrity and honesty and all that, everything that I've lived by my whole life. So when he'd finished ranting, I said, I'll tell you what, Steve, I'll make a deal with you. You're in no effing position to make an effing deal with me. I said, now hear me out. I said, Steve, what is that over there? And there was 500 on his desk. He said, it's an effing computer. I said, no, it's not. I said, it's a piece of plastic with some keys on it. I said, have you got any idea how difficult it is to market and sell a piece of plastic with some keys on it? Because I said, if you let me do what I want to do, I'll bring you more business than you've ever seen, or you'll have a reason to get rid of me. And I said, from now on, we don't sell computers, we sell dreams. Because what I want to sell is what that product can deliver. That's what people want to know. They don't want to know gadgets and widgets and this and that in it. Some people do, but most people, they just want to know, what will it do for me? So that's where the idea of the Batman pack came up. Now, I went to Ocean Software, and the reason, I sat down with my team. I had 6 people in my team. We sat down and said, right, we're going to produce the best pack that's ever been produced in the world. what software are we going to put in it? And we knew then that the Ocean guys had literally just come back from Hollywood, and they just paid $1 million for the license to use the name Batman the movie. And so we knew that in conjunction with the movie, it was going to be a big deal. And so I rang them up and I said, look, guys, I want to come up and talk to you about a proposal I've got that you will either have the balls to go with, or you'll send for the men in the white coats to drag me away and lock me away. So I went up to see them. I said, look, this is what I want to do. I said, I want to produce a bundle which is all about Batman. The fact that there is an Amiga inside is incidental. And if you look at up there, there's the Batman pack up there on display, okay? And I said, what I want to do, I said, I want you to give me, when the game is finished, I want you to give it to me for 2 months, that you can only get it through the pack. You can't get it on its own under any circumstances. I said, I want to pay you very little for it, and I only want to commit to 10,000 pieces. So the first thing they said was send for the men in the white coats, because it was asking a hell of a lot, right? So they discussed, and they said, okay, David, we've got a couple of worries. They said, first of all, we think our dealers are going to be really, really angry if you have it for 2 months before they can get it. They said, secondly, we've just paid out $1 million. We reckon it's going to cost us $1 million to make the game. We've done all of our figures. We've estimated how many we need to sell, not only to break even, but to make a profit. And we're worried that this activity might affect that. So I said, okay, well, I said, point one, you're right. I said, I totally believe that your dealers will be disappointed. They will be angry. But I said, my guess is that'll last for about 48 hours. Because if this goes the way I want it to go, they will be selling a £400 product as opposed to a £40 product. I know as a retailer what I'd do, what I'd like. Fair enough. And then I said, remember that I have a marketing budget which is significantly greater than yours, because my product is a higher value. And I said, what I promise to do is that my marketing will be totally in alignment with yours. So everything we match, we match all the promotional material, everything is matched. So the presence will be about Batman. Anyway, the net result was exactly as I predicted, 48 hours, and then the dealers were really happy because they were starting to sell a lot of Batman packs. They sold more than 5 times their highest estimate that they were going to sell. So they did really well out of that. And I didn't take 10,000 pieces from them. I ended up taking 186,000 pieces, because that's how many Batman packs we sold in 12 weeks. 186,000 of them. Amazing. I mean, I'm still stunned to this day. But did you notice that after we did that, Sega and Nintendo, they did bundles. I don't think they were particularly good, but they followed us. And that's, for me, that's the best recommendation and endorsement I can get, is that my competitors copied us. Here is my book. It's over here. It's 25 euros, and I will sign it for you. Probably worth less if I sign it, but I will sign it for you. And please come and buy them, because I don't really want to take them home with me. I've also got these really excellent quality mouse mats, which they're really top quality. They're €5 if you want one of those. And again, I'll sign that if you want me to. I said you can't ever leave without asking for the order. So yeah, please support me. Don't forget to there's one more. Don't forget to downtimepublishing.com and download the free CD. But there's one other thing. Anybody who buys anything from me before next Sunday, not tomorrow, next Sunday, is going into a free prize draw competition, which is going to be drawing it myself at Amiga 34 in Neuss on the Sunday. And one person's name is going to come out, and that person is going to win a brand new Aeon Technology A1222 computer, which will be inside one of those checkmate cases that you've got over there, and all assembled and checked and running by Amiga Kit before it goes out. So it's a fantastic prize. And all you got to do is to buy something from me. And if anybody's already bought something from me and you haven't entered the competition, just come and see me, and I'll just tell you how to enter the competition. Because you have to do it yourself. I'm not going to do it for you. Is that fair enough?
Yeah.
So, is everybody happy?
Yes.
Well, thank you very much indeed, ladies and gentlemen. I do appreciate your attention. Thank you.